Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something pretty fundamental for security leaders. It's that question. How do you actually know if your security program is, well, working?
Right. It's not just about counting the attacks you blocked, is it?
Exactly. The real trick is proving the value, the impact of all that security work to the rest of the business, especially the people who control the budget.
Yeah, showing that value. It's about shifting security. Maybe from feeling like this mysterious art to something more like a science, something measurable.
That's precisely it. For too long, cybersecurity felt a bit like, I don't know, old-timey medicine. Lots happening, maybe some good results.
But without that solid, data-backed reason why things work, or sometimes don't, security folks need to get beyond just, reacting and patching things up.
They need to show they're efficient, effective, and base it all on numbers, on data.
Yeah, that's the only path to really proving your worth and getting the investment you need.
Okay, so that's our focus for this deep dive. We've looked at a few things here. There's a guide on essential CISO KPIs, those key performance indicators everyone talks about.
The must-haves in the toolkit.
Right. And we've also got insights from a CISO who's actually done this, built a metrics program, reported up to the execs and the board, some real talk there about what works and what just makes eyes glaze over.
Always good to get that real-world perspective.
Definitely. And finally, we'll look at a structured way to score risk, using the NIST cyber risk scoring program as an example.
So the mission today is really to unpack all of this. What metrics actually mean something outside the security team? What are the practical hurdles in reporting this stuff?
How does that quantitative risk scoring actually work?
And ultimately, how can you use data not just to make security better internally, but to clearly show the business, hey, this is the value we bring, this is why you invest in us.
All right, let's dive in. Where do you even begin? If you're a CISO trying to measure effectiveness, what are the building blocks?
You've got to start with your foundational KPIs, key performance indicators. These are the specific quantifiable numbers you track to see if you're hitting your security goals.
Okay, quantifiable.
And crucially, how those security goals actually line up with what the overall business is trying to achieve.
So they're not just isolated tech numbers. They have to connect to the bigger picture.
Exactly right. When you track these well, you can demonstrate the value you're adding, find the gaps in your defenses or processes.
Benchmark yourself.
Yeah, benchmark against others or just your own past performance. And it can even help, believe it or not, build a better security culture across the whole company.
Okay, give us some examples. What are some of these crucial operational or tactical KPIs? What should be on that dashboard?
Well, a really fundamental pair has to do with how fast you react to incidents. First is mean time to detect, or MTTD.
Okay.
That's basically the average time it takes from when something bad happens to when your team actually knows about it.
Got it. And the second?
Mean time to respond, MTTR. That's the average time from when you detect it to when you actually contain it and fix the problem.
Right. And obviously, faster is better for both. You want to shrink that window to limit the damage. Where do those numbers come from?
The data is pulled from your tools, your SAM platform. That's the system collecting all the security logs, your EDR tools on endpoints, maybe forensic logs if you have a major incident, and just your own team's documented incident timelines.
Okay. What about just knowing if your defenses are, catching the bad stuff in the first place?
Right. Effectiveness. That's where you look at something like incident detection rate. It's basically the percentage of real threats or malicious events that your systems think intrusion detection SIAM rules actually flag successfully.
So it helps you weed out the false alarms.
Exactly. It helps you see how well your automated defenses are working and tells you, are we catching the real stuff versus just generating noise? You figure it out by matching up alerts with actual confirmed incidents.
Makes sense. So detect fast, respond fast, know you're catching things, but ideally you stop things before they happen. What about prevention metrics?
Oh, absolutely. Proactive stuff is key. Patch management compliance is a huge one.
Still, even after all these years?
Still. It's the percentage of your systems that get the necessary security patches within the time frame you've set. Unpatched systems are sadly still a massive way in for attackers.
Wow. Okay, what else on the proactive side?
Security configuration compliance. Are your systems set up securely according to established baselines like the CIS benchmarks? Misconfigurations are another really common cause of breaches.
And the data for those comes from?
Your patch management systems, vulnerability scanners, configuration management databases, those kinds of tools.
Okay, and we can't ignore the people element, right? Humans are often the weak link.
You got it. The human layer is critical. So phishing simulation failure rate that directly measures how many employees click that fake malicious link or give up info in your tests.
Ouch. But necessary.
Necessary. And you pair that with training completion rate. Are people actually doing the security awareness training? These show how well you're tackling that human vulnerability. Your simulation tools and learning platforms give you this data.
Any other big categories for these core KPIs?
Yeah, looking outward is more important than ever. Think third-party risk ratings. Are your vendors and partners secure? You get this from questionnaires, maybe audits, or those security rating services.
Because a breach in your supply chain can become your breach.
Exactly. And while it can be tough to nail down perfectly, tracking the actual cost of incidents is vital. That includes the direct cost investigation, recovery, but also the indirect ones. You need that to show the real impact.
Okay, so these KPIs give you a solid view of operations response prevention, but then you have to take something like, I don't know, MTTR or patch percentage, and explain why the CEO should care. When they're worried about revenue or market share, that seems like the big jump.
That is the big jump. And it's where so many CISOs struggle. This is where those insights from the CISO source we looked at are gold. They were really blunt about it.
What did they say?
They said a lot of common metrics like abstract scores from some generic framework or, just general industry benchmarks that can be, and I quote, entirely useless for actually helping executives make business decisions.
Wow, useless.
Because they lack business context. They don't give that actionable insight that connects to what the C-suite actually cares about day to day.
So it's less about reporting on security activities and more about reporting security's impact on the business.
Precisely. It's moving security reporting from that craft mindset, like pre-science medicine, to being a proper science.
Gotcha.
Stop just presenting technical status.
Yeah.
Show the efficiency, the effectiveness, and tie it directly to business outcomes. You need to integrate your security metrics with the metrics the rest of the business already uses. Like, did that security incident cause system downtime? How much? Did that data breach lead to customers leaving? Can we see that in the churn rate? Connecting security data to existing business metrics, that's powerful stuff.
And that CISO source really hammered home quantifying risk in money terms, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. That was a huge point. They argued that instead of telling leadership, we have a high risk here, you need to translate that into potential financial loss.
So instead of high risk,
you say there's a, let's say, 15% probability of a loss exceeding $5 million in the next year due to this specific risk.
Got it.
Leadership gets dollars and cents. It makes the risk immediately understandable, comparable to other business risks they juggle.
Okay, that makes sense for things you can clearly cost out. But what about the fuzzy stuff like damage to your reputation? People call that intangible loss.
Yeah, and the source pushed back hard on calling it intangible. Their point was reputation damage matters precisely because it does have tangible financial consequences.
How so?
Well, think about it. If customers leave, that's lost revenue tangible. If you get fined by regulators, that's a direct cost tangible. If it becomes harder to get investment or loans, your cost of capital goes up tangible. If employee morale tanks and people quit, that costs money in recruitment and lost productivity tangible.
Okay.
The trick is you got to work with other departments, finance, legal, sales, HR, to find the data points that let you actually put a number on those effects. That's how you make the intangible very tangible for the business leaders.
That's a really different way of looking at it. So how often do you deliver these kinds of business-focused reports? And you can't just send the same thing to everyone, right?
Absolutely not. Tailoring is critical. Your tech teams, they need the operational stuff, the MTTD, the patch rates, the nitty-gritty. But the execs, the board, they need the high-level summary focused on business impact, risk exposure, usually in those financial terms.
One size definitely does not fit all.
No way. The suggested rhythm was maybe quarterly for a specific security governance group, perhaps an annual big report for the board, maybe with shorter updates and regular board meetings, and definitely regular one-on-ones with key execs using reports tailored just for them.
Right. Grounding the board in technical details is just counterproductive.
Totally. And as you're building out these metrics and reports, there's something really important to watch out for. Goodhart's Law.
Goodhart's Law. Refresh my memory.
The gist is, when a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric.
Okay. Meaning?
Meaning if you make hitting a specific number the only goal, people will figure out ways to game the number, sometimes in ways that don't actually improve the thing you wanted to improve.
Like teaching to the test?
Kind of. The CISO source used a pretty stark example about emergency rooms. If you set a target metric for how fast patients get into the ER,
Yeah.
hospitals might just have ambulances queue up outside to stop the clock. The metric looks great, but patient care actually gets worse.
Yeah.
So the point is, focus on the outcome you want, like reduced actual business risk, not just hitting the metric itself.
That's a really crucial warning. Okay, so you avoid that pitfall. And when you need to justify spending money on security, build that budget case based on reducing risk.
That's where things like the FAIR framework factor analysis of information or FAIRCAM come into play. These are structured ways to actually quantify cyber risk in financial terms.
So they help you make the argument.
Exactly. They let you calculate the risk reduction cost efficacy of a security tool or service, basically. How much risk does this thing reduce, and what does it cost us? It gives you a solid, data-driven argument for your budget requests.
Okay, let's unpack this. So using models like FAIR, focusing on that financial impact, that's really the key to building a strong budget case, right? And showing that your security investments are actually delivering value. And speaking of making those crucial investments and managing budgets effectively, that brings us to our first sponsor. I mean, navigating the cybersecurity world, you have to make smart calls about where to put your resources.
Absolutely.
Whether you're trying to build that budget proposal using quantifiable risk data like we've been talking about, or just figuring out which tools and services are out there in the market, well, having the right information is everything.
It really is.
And that's exactly why resources like www.cisobudgetbuilder.com and www.cisomarketplace.com are so valuable. They're designed to give security leaders that support helping find solutions, manage the budget process, and ultimately prove the real value of security.
Good tools to have in the belt.
Definitely. Welcome back. So we've covered the basics, those foundational KPIs, and the really critical skill of translating all that technical stuff into language the business understands, ideally financial terms. Now, let's look at how a more structured framework can pull this together. The NIST Cyber Risk Scoring Program, CRS, is a good example here.
Yeah, NIST CRS. It's a program they developed, initially aimed at the U.S. federal government, but the ideas apply much more broadly. It's designed to basically streamline and improve the old way of doing security assessments and authorizations, the A&A process.
Okay, streamline how?
The main goal is to provide risk data that's more continuous, more real-time, and has more context. So you get a better situational awareness and can prioritize your security efforts more effectively.
And what are the big benefits NIST sees in this approach?
They list a few key ones. It gives you a more integrated enterprise-wide view of risk rather than just siloed reports. It pushes for more frequent, more actionable risk info, getting away from those big static assessments that are outdated as soon as they're done.
More dynamic, then.
Exactly. There's a big emphasis on efficiency through automation, too. And it provides a stronger, data-driven foundation for making ongoing authorization decisions, basically, continuously verifying that a system is secure enough to operate.
And it works with different frameworks.
Yeah, it's designed to be flexible, so you can present the risk posture data in ways that align with, say, the main NIST Risk Management Framework, RMF, or the Cybersecurity Framework, CSF.
Okay, so how does it actually work under the hood? What are the core processes?
It really starts with something called risk profiling. This is where you figure out how important the system is, what's its business function, what are its technical characteristics.
Why does that matter?
Because understanding the system's value and the impact if it gets compromised helps you tailor the security controls appropriately. You align the controls based on likelihood and impact, informed by the system's profile.
Got it. And that profiling feeds into the scoring.
Precisely. The risk scoring part is the quantitative engine. It uses ratings for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the classic CIA triad for different parts of the system and the system overall.
And these scores aren't static.
No, that's key. They're dynamic. They pull in data from lots of places, results from manual assessments, vulnerability scans, compliance checks, you name it. The whole point is to generate a number, a score, that lets you compare risk levels across different systems in a consistent apples-to-apples way.
That comparison piece sounds really useful. Trying to compare purely qualitative high or medium risk assessments across systems is tough.
It's incredibly difficult, yeah. Quantification helps standardize that.
What kind of tools does NIST mention for making this practical? You need something to manage all this data.
For sure. The sources talk about using enterprise GRC platforms, governance, risk, and compliance tools. Archer was mentioned as an example. These platforms handle the workflow, track risks that have been accepted, manage plans of action, and milestones, POA&Ms.
The remediation plans.
Right. They also help automate generating documentation and, importantly, integrate results from all those different scanning tools.
And for seeing the results.
Visualization tools are key there. Something like Tableau was mentioned. You use these to build dashboards that can show the risk data in different ways for different people, integrate vulnerability details, track trends over time.
So it's the automation and the clear dashboards that make the data usable, actionable.
Yeah.
How does this tie into that idea of continuous monitoring we hear so much about?
Well, NIST CRS is built specifically to enable ISCM information security continuous monitoring and that ongoing authorization, or OA.
How?
By using the risk scores to prioritize.
Yeah.
You focus your continuous monitoring and control assessments on the areas with the highest quantified risk. And those dashboards and reports provide the near real-time posture needed to make informed OA decisions, instead of just relying on, massive assessments every few years.
That makes sense, and I think you mentioned they even build privacy into this.
They do, yeah. The framework includes privacy capabilities, especially for systems handling PII, personally identifiable information. It can help automate assigning the right privacy controls based on the type of data and what the system does. It helps generate the required privacy documentation, like PTAs and PIAs, privacy threshold analyses, and impact assessments. And it even tries to quantify privacy risk based on objectives like predictability, manageability, and disassociability of the data.
So it's trying to give a holistic risk picture, security, and privacy, and different views for different roles.
Exactly. They talk about having different dashboards. Maybe an assessor sees a dashboard that helps them prioritize their assessment tasks based on risk scores. Management, on the other hand, gets dashboards showing the big picture overall system status, compliance levels, risk trends, maybe specific indicators for patching or configuration weaknesses.
It's all about getting the right information to the right person in a way they can understand and act on.
That's the goal.
Okay, so pulling this all together, it feels like effective security measurement isn't just about picking one thing, is it? It's like a combination.
Definitely seems that way.
Mm-hmm.
You need to master those core operational KPIs we talked about first.
Mm-hmm.
Then you absolutely need that skill of translating the technical picture into real business impact, ideally using financial language that CISO stress.
Challenging that intangible loss idea.
Right. And then you can potentially layer on a structured framework, maybe something like NIST CRS, or using tools inspired by it to help manage, quantify, and visualize all that risk data more systematically and continuously.
So the metrics aren't just for reporting up. They actually help run security better.
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole point, really.
Right.
The goal isn't just collecting numbers to put in a report or check a box. It's using that data to make smarter decisions.
Like deciding where to invest.
Exactly. Guiding investments in new tools, justifying staffing needs. Maybe you use incident workload data to show your SOC analysts are burning out, or just refining your internal processes based on what the metrics tell you is working or not working.
And that context piece you mentioned earlier seems huge too. Just having a list of vulnerabilities isn't that helpful without context.
Not at all. A raw CVSS score, for example, can create so much noise. Is that critical vulnerability on an internal test server with no sensitive data? Or is it on your main public-facing web application?
Oh, big difference.
Huge difference. Contextualizing those vulnerabilities, understanding the asset's importance, exposure, existing controls, lets you cut through the noise dramatically. Teams can then focus fixing the stuff that actually matters most, which in turn improves your real risk posture and your metrics, like patch compliance on critical assets.
And this whole metrics program, it's not a one-and-done project, right? It needs to evolve.
Constantly. You have to review and refine your KPIs periodically. The threat landscape changes, your business changes, so the metrics that matter most will likely change too.
So don't be afraid to ditch metrics that aren't useful anymore.
Please do. If a metric isn't actually helping you make better decisions, protect the organization more effectively, or communicate value, then it's just clutter. Get rid of it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because as we're talking about using these metrics and frameworks to make smart, data-driven decisions about, which security controls to use and where to invest the budget.
Yeah.
Well, that connects directly to the day-to-day reality for CISOs. You have to make the case for the budget, showing the value, justifying the spend with data.
The constant battle.
And then you actually have to go out and find the right tools, the right services to put that strategy into action. That's why having good resources for budget planning and just understanding the market landscape is so vital.
You need good intel.
Exactly. And again, that's where resources like www.cisobudgetbuilder.com and www.cisomarketplace.com come in. They aim to give security leaders that practical help translating risk insights and metrics into solid plans for getting and managing the resources they need to actually build that strong defense.
Makes sense. Connecting the metrics to the money in the market.
Right. So let's try to sum up this deep dive. It's clear that showing cybersecurity's value is complex. It starts with getting those foundational KPIs, right? The operational stuff, the proactive measures.
Yep, got to have the basics down.
Then there's that crucial, maybe harder skill of translating technical risk into business impact, using financial terms, pushing back on intangible loss like that CISO advised.
Speaking the language of the business.
And potentially using structured approaches like the NIST CRS example, using frameworks and tools to help manage, quantify, and visualize risk continuously.
Absolutely. The sources really drive home that it's not just about collecting the data. The power comes from using those metrics and risk scores strategically.
To do what?
To really demonstrate the protective value security delivers.
Yeah.
To make that clear, undeniable case for the resources you need. And to make sure your decisions are grounded in data that reflects the actual risks the business faces.
It's about communication, really. Learning to talk effectively in business terms, whether that's showing fast incident response times, proving compliance, or putting potential financial losses on the table.
That's the heart of it.
And, the sources also kind of suggest this whole field of cybersecurity measurement is still, maturing. It's moving away from being just a craft, more towards that data-driven science.
It's definitely an evolution.
So as we face totally new stuff like how do you measure the risk of AI systems, or how do you quantify the impact of the security talent shortage? What are the next metrics going to be? What new ways of measuring risk will leaders need to figure out? What's the essential dashboard going to look like in, say, 5 years?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Always more challenges, always a need to adapt how we measure success.
Plenty to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into measuring cyber success. We really hope it gave you some valuable things to consider for your own situation.